keynote ender med at vare 40 minutter, men jeg kender ikke, det bare varer 40 minutter. Debatten bliver afrundet. Jeg går lige ud og...
There's a rule of law. Yeah, I think rule of law reports.
I mean, we are pushing hard to get a manual rule of law report because we think this last chapter would distinguish between artistic and cultural autonomy and news media freedom. Then maybe civil society could progress, but I don't know.
I think so. I think very much. Given you, yeah, because the really thing is we're all dependent on whether
where the situation is horrible for the cultural sector generally for the democratic structures. So the Minister of Culture has replaced half of the ministerial staff with incompetence. They've sacked half of the museums and so on. And the cultural sector has come together and drafted a fully-fledged cultural policy for Slovakia for the moment the government will change. And now the biggest opposition party comes to the and says, but who are you? Why? I mean, you're not politicians, why are you doing that? And then that somehow shows what a misconception of civil society is. Instead of saying, well, brilliant, let's sit down and talk. Like, yeah,
All right, everyone, if you will please find your seats. We are ready to get started again in this final third installment. And all right, please come down and find your seats so we can start the program. And close the doors, let the tranquility take over. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break, got some food, some energy into your bodies, a little bit of fresh air, maybe met some new, nice, wonderful, interesting people. This is the third and final part of today's conference, and now we are digging even deeper into what collaboration actually means and what it looks like in an international standpoint, from cultural promotion to cultural collaboration. And in the break, some of you asked me if it is possible to see, because we are live streaming, it is also being recorded, if it was possible to see some of the panels or some of the keynotes later on. It will, all of the recordings will be made accessible afterwards. So if you are on the sort of conference list because you participated, you will also get the link for it, and it will be publicly shared later on, just so you know. All right, to start us off, once again we have a keynote followed by a panel, and I am very pleased to welcome the next and final keynote speaker, Emil Hertling-Peronard. Emil is an award-winning and Oscar-nominated Greenlandic filmmaker and producer operating out of Nuuk and Copenhagen. He works to advance the Greenlandic film industry, and empower marginalized voices in cinema. He has a production company, Anorak Film, and they have been distributed the films created by Anorak worldwide with premieres at leading festivals like Venice, Sundance, Berlinale, and Cannes. Please give Emil a warm welcome.
Thank you, Musa. Great introduction. I couldn't have written that better myself. I'm going to take off my jacket. Since we're a bit fewer here this afternoon, I think we can move into a less formal way of doing this. I'm going to start by saying that I have a slight cold, so if I'm sneezing or coughing in the middle of this, please don't take it personal. The first thing I'm going to do is plant my flag right here, because I think it's important. I think it's important to remember that this flag exists and that my country exists, and my keynote today will be about that importance of existing. As Musa said, I'm from Greenland. My mom is Greenlandic. My father is Danish. I run production companies out of Greenland. To add to the introduction, I can also say that I'm the co-director of Nuuk International Film Festival. I'm also the chair of the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, which provides support for Arctic Indigenous filmmakers all across the nation-states of the Arctic region. I'm also a mix of the Danish Commonwealth through my heritage. My grandfather was from Asiat in northern Greenland, but he was also the very first and only Greenlandic minister to ever serve in a Danish government in this building. So we're back. Before we get started on my story, I think I need to give you a little bit of background. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds of Danish film history, in case you are not aware. The very first cinematic film roll that was shot in Denmark was back in 1897. And it's a film roll, it lasts around 60 seconds, and the title is Driving Greenlandic Sled Dogs. It's shot not in Greenland, but in Fælledparken, a famous park here in Copenhagen. So when we talk about our voice in filmmaking from Greenland, we used to say with a little tongue-in-cheek that we have been misrepresented in cinema since the dawn of cinema. And that's absolutely true. If you look at some other milestones in Danish cinema, you can talk about the first feature film with sound. That was called Eskimo, that was shot in Greenland. The first color film was called Where Mountains Sail. It was shot in Greenland. That was also the same year as Erik Balling made Revidor, shot in Greenland. And those two films were the first Danish films to ever be nominated for Oscars. Where Mountains Sail were nominated for Best Documentary Feature, and Revidor was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. So a lot of milestones in Danish cinema based on Greenlandic locations, Greenlandic culture, and of course our people. So what was my upbringing like in Nuuk? What was my representation like? Well, there were no cinemas. We used to go into the community centers and we would watch Danish cinema, like the Olsen Gang. I think that's, you know about that also in several of the Nordic countries. So like Danish comedies in Danish, which mean that every 20 minutes they would cut the film and a Greenlandic voiceover would explain what had happened. So that was the representation that we had up until 1997, where the first cinema opened in Greenland, in Gadois. And the first film that they screened was, of course, Bille August's Miss Smeller's Sense of Snow, where the representation was, well, an English actress playing the lead role of Smilla, and mostly everything being shot in a studio in Germany. So, just 2 years later in our timeline, that's when things finally started to change. In 1999, the first Greenlandic short film was released. It was called Sinithluarit, Good Night. It was a comedy about a sexually frustrated man and his his doubts that his wife was faithful to him. And it was directed by Inuk Silis-Høgh. I saw it at the premiere in Gadoaq in 1999. I saw Greenlandic language on screen. I saw Greenlandic humor on screen. I saw my friends acting, and in the credit roll, of course, all these Greenlandic names that I knew. And what I saw also on stage was, of course, Inuk himself, who presented the film and talked about how it was made. So that was life-changing. That was culture changing. That was the foundation shifting under us. And 10 years later, I started to work on my first film after going through college here, or university here in Copenhagen. And I, of course, started to work with Inuk because, he was our director. And we worked to create Greenland's first feature documentary, Sumi, The Sound of a Revolution, which also turned out, as we didn't know, to be the first film about Greenland's history that was ever made by Greenlanders. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that, for instance, we didn't have any access to film production money from Greenland, so we didn't really have a high budget. We couldn't access any of the archive footage that was all held by, institutions like Danish Broadcast Corporation. It was films that were shot, archive footage that was shot in Greenland before 1982, when we finally had our own TV station. So we couldn't access any of that, but what we could access was our community in Greenland. So we asked anyone who had film rolls, Super 8 footage from this period that we were documenting, the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Greenland, to send them to us. And we built this homemade, home-filmed archive of private home footage. And when we had these 40 hours of footage in the editing room and we looked them through, what happened was we opened a window to a past that we had never seen before, which was in color, it was intimate, it was within people's homes. You would see children smiling and kids running towards the camera rather than, running away screaming. Because, it was their uncle or father or grandfather behind the camera. So it kind of completely changed how we looked at our own history. And when we released the film back in 2014, we also experienced how it changed how the people of Greenland looked at that film when they saw relatives in the footage or when they saw names that they recognized in the credit roll. So it really was so clear what it meant to have authentic representations, stories told by us, for us. And so the only problem was, it was a huge ordeal to make this film. It took more than 3 years to raise the money that we needed in order to be able to find a Danish co-producer that could access the Danish Film Institute for co-production money. Because that's how the systems work. It's strictly on a nation-state basis. So if you don't have enough money at home, you cannot get any money abroad. And that's one of the tricky things that I have come to realize in international collaborations. I think I'm maybe 1/4 into what I had prepared to say, but okay, I'm gonna speed up. But that's fine. So it was a groundbreaking thing to realize how urgent it is to tell our stories, but also how difficult it is structurally to do so. And we have since then set up collaboration between Inuit across colonial borders in Greenland and in Canada. Even more difficult, we had to open up companies in Denmark, and my Inuit co-producer friends in Arctic Canada had to work with non-indigenous co-producers within Canada to have the track record so that they could access their funding systems. So we did it, but at the same time we also proved to everyone that the colonial funding systems that are in place, they don't work for us. So we need to build something that's better and much more flexible if we want diversity and if we want to include other cultures in the stories that we tell. And that we can talk about more in the panel. But I just want to say towards the end that now we finally, after 20 years of working in Greenlandic cinema, we now this year have a Greenlandic Film Institute. So we finally have an organization that can represent us on a national level and that can work with other organizations in other countries. So that's a huge milestone and a game changer. And I know that Bjarne Corydon was in this room early on. I had kind of pictured him that he would be sitting right there and that I could pitch an idea to him. So I'm just going to pitch it anyway, and I'm going to say, Dear Bjarne, wherever you are, can you imagine this? A primetime, ambitious drama series, Sunday night on DR1, a story from Greenland written by Greenlandic writers, directed by Greenlandic directors, developed in collaboration between Greenland and Denmark in a workshop setting where we make an open call for Greenlandic writers to send in their drama series ideas, workshop them together, the 10 best, to a treatment level, then from the treatment level, develop the 2 best to script level, and from script level, develop one to put into production. Shot in Greenland, film crews from both Denmark and Greenland working together on authentic storytelling. Why? Because of this flag, because of what it represents, and because of what we have to protect in these times. What happens in Greenland right now with the American interest is based on the idea that we don't exist. I have seen that firsthand. I have traveled all around the world, and especially in the States, I have been asked so many times, Greenland? I didn't know people even lived there. We have to change that. So the stories that we make and the films that we share are not only culture that we build our nation upon, it's also our line of defense. And we have to really do that. So Bjarne, wherever you are, let's do this. We're ready. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emil, for your keynote and for planting the flag right here. I will let that stay with your grace.
Yes, please do so.
Yeah, absolutely. We are heading into the final panel debate. So I would like to invite the next speakers up on stage, and I will introduce you when you have arrived. If you will please join me up here and join Emil as well. So for this next and final panel, as I said, we are moving from sort of cultural promotion and just sort of collaboration to actually building relations. What does that mean? What does that look like? What kind of structure and infrastructure, difficult word, is needed for us to support it? And joining Emil and myself, we have Annie Syrjalainen, Senior Advisor and Deputy Director at the Nordic Culture Fund. We have Kasper Holten, Stage Director and CEO of the Royal Theatre in Denmark. And we have Julia Reklaite, the Director of the Lithuanian Culture Institute and Vice President of UNIC, which is the EU National Institutes for Culture. Give them a round of applause. Now, I think, Julia, I'd like to start with you. Just sort of following from actually where Emil ended on sort of, it is not just culture, it's also our line of defense. Because I know it's something you also are focused a little bit on as a representative from a small country as well. It is not just about collaboration, it is also something more. Will you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, really, I wanted to change my discourse, while you were speaking, because I'm also living proof, because I was born in the country that didn't exist 36 years ago, which is Lithuania. And we gained independence when I was 7 years old. And, that's my strongest personal memory. And I'm living proof, actually, just being here to illustrate what path, we have been going and where we are. Because for many, many years, culture for us was the way to speak that we exist in general. That we have our own language, that we have our own, history, tradition, and so on and so forth. And only last 5 or 10 years, in our internal discussions how to be represented abroad, I see that we don't want only to show off, but we want to collaborate. We already feel that we are able to, be in the conversation, be part of the conversation, be treated as equal, and not only to learn, but also we have things to teach, because it's the strongest, fastest growing economy. It is really, like, Lithuania is always named as a luck story of the European Union in general, and so on. There's so many things happened already that, in general, for me personal, to be here, it's really something that my parents couldn't imagine at all, So I think that this transformation illustrates very well also the topics that were touched today about this long-term relationships, about trust, about Eastern partnerships, and about the countries, about working with, not only on behalf, and so on and so forth. So I had a few keywords that I wanted to mention, and I see that someone left their paper here, and that's the same keywords, which is trust, and also not the victory and stuff like that. So I think that somehow we have a very strong common sense here. So to speak about today's topic, there are a few things that I wanted also to emphasize. One thing is that in general now, culture for us is not only the way to speak, but also it's a part of our reputational security. Now Lithuania is going to be the first country where German brigade is going to be settled in 2027. It's the first time after the Second World War when Germany will have their brigade abroad. But we want that to be not only defense question, it's a question of the security, and it's a question of collaboration, cooperation, and so on. So when the high-level soldiers, authorities come to Lithuania, it's not the infrastructure, military infrastructure that we show first. It's that we bring them to churches, we bring them to museums, we bring them, to our culture institutions to show, so they can understand what culture they are defending, that we are the same, that we have a common ground, that we have a discussion to continue. Second thing is when we speak about international collaboration, I think that the keyword would be co-creation, because whenever we meet somebody, usually, and you also spoke about that, about infrastructure, about getting money, you have to have another bunch of money and so on. But I think that it's not only about money. I mean, not many years ago, we had the discussion in Lithuania about the term itself, interdisciplinary art. And I like the explanation very much, that when two or more different disciplines come together and create something that they wouldn't do on their own, that's the interdisciplinary thing. I think that's the way to explain also international cooperation and co-creation. You couldn't do something without the partner. It's not the same story that you tell if you tell it alone. It's a different story. It's a story of co-creation. And the third thing is about our role in general. It's about our identity, and I think that, we all face that pure cultures doesn't really exist. And Europe is really about exchange, about influence, about translation, about connection. So cultural relations is not only about understanding each other, but the most brilliant thing maybe is when you recognize yourself in the other. That's the most magnificent moment that stays for you, So somehow to really to get to know, to recognize, and to understand the core is the essence. And I think that would be the way for us to continue. That's my first.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Kasper, I would like to go to you. And one of the topics that already have been centered here is sort of the question around equality. What is equal in a collaboration? And I would like to dig more into that. But before I do so, you're the CEO of the Royal Theatre in Denmark. And when I sent out sort of a frame for the conversation, your first sort of initial response was also to talk a little bit about opera.
Yeah,
as an international kind of art.
Definitely. I mean, my background is in opera. I've directed operas, and I can confirm that the Baltic countries already 25 years ago joined the Nordic Forum of Opera Houses, and later on Opera Europa, our network. It's, I think, 24 years since I directed an opera in Riga, in Latvia. So I think very much we already count you as part of the European family, and as countries in, of course, your own right, and equal collaborating partners. I guess the tradition of opera has always been I mean, back in the 18th century, we had Handel, a German composer, living in London, writing Italian operas. So the idea that music and the language of emotions is not stopped by national borders has always somehow been a natural for opera. And as such, I think this genre can really prove an inspiration in a time where maybe for me it is not, and for good understandable reasons, the two first speakers talked a lot about national identity. I think for us, the line of defense in Denmark is very much, as a nation, connecting much more to our European family, to our European cultural heritage. And I think that is so richly represented in the stage canon and not least the operatic canon. If we look at the joint, generous amount of human knowledge and experience through the European history gathered and assembled in the history of opera, and that we can put on today in international collaborations. It is only 10 years ago since I kind of repeated the Handel experiment by going to France and persuading a Finnish composer, late Kaija Saariaho, to write an opera in English, which eventually went to the Metropolitan Opera and was about school shootings. So still, opera finds this way to digress and travel across borders. And I think that's a big inspiration, because I think when you look at Puccini's Tosca, you go to the theater, you're reminded that even 230 years ago, people in Europe suffered from war, from the threat of political oppression, suffered great personal consequences, but they could act. Tosca kills the police chief Scarpia, and although that has consequences for her, she could act. And that is, for me, why we need art more than ever before. As the line of defense on the outside, but more than anything on the inside. I look at my kids standing with these, and I look at my daughter standing with TikTok, and I think, I've lost. I've lost. What can I do about it? But what we can do about it is that I think the biggest risk we face is not even war or climate change or artificial intelligence. They are big enough. The biggest challenge we face is if we are overpowered by the loss of feeling the ability to act. Magtesløsheden. If we end up thinking that tomorrow is going to be worse than today and that we can't do anything about it. If my kids grow up and think there's no reason to act because why bother, then we've lost. And art, I think, can be an inspiration that all through European history, all back to Plato and Socrates, we have had a tradition in Europe for the curious, critical curiosity, for always pushing dogma, populist regimes, to never accepting easy answers, to challenge the church, to challenge the populists, to challenge the autocrats, and always move forward. And I think in our cultural heritage today, is so much we share and that we can develop together.
Can I ask you a follow-up?
Yes. I will try to answer it slightly briefer. Yes.
I would like to ask you a follow-up question to this, because earlier on in the day we also had Bjarne Corydon, who's the Director General of the Danish Broadcasting Company. Yeah. We have strong national institutions here in many European countries. You're also the director of the Royal Theatre, which is also a national institution. And what you're talking about when you're talking about opera, I think is, first of all, very, very, very interesting. I think there's also a question around the accessibility to get this kind of experience as a national theatre that I know you're also aware of, but I would like to elaborate a little bit, or for you to elaborate a little bit on who has access to seeing these performances, these stories, this cultural canon that you're talking about. How do you work with that?
My favorite topic, so please stop me when we need to move on.
2 minutes.
I think we live in a time where we need the big institutions more than ever before. Because if we really truly want to break through to more people, the institutions, Danish Broadcasting, the Royal Theatre, are crucial. But it is also crucial that institutions don't take ourselves for granted, and we start looking in a much, much more open way on changing, on looking at ourselves from the outside in. And so over the 7 years I've been there, we've done a lot of work at the Royal Theatre to reach more people, to work not just by instinct, but by structural change, by data, driven by a template, so you make sure that you address different audience groups across the seats, and by making a children's playground that is for free, that is right now, I think, in Nyborg and going to IKAST next week, by playing in Aarhus at Moesgaard Museum, by trying to develop new initiatives, and in December we're going to open the world's first national stage, the old drama house here in Copenhagen, that will be transformed into a huge children's playground, where kids aged 4 to 12 can put on ballet shoes to go on stage, dress up, learn to make props. Hopefully it will be a place where people will go because it's fun, maybe a bit educational too, even if they have no idea about theater. So that I agree with you completely. The institutions are crucial, but unless the institutions change and open ourselves to more people, then what's the point of favoring that tradition that we're talking about? So that's a big, big challenge for all of us. Right. And we thankfully work with our colleagues also in Lithuania and across Europe to share best practices, because there's no need for all of us to invent the wheel. Absolutely. Annie, I would like to continue with you, because you are a senior advisor and the deputy director, as I said in the introduction, at the Nordic Culture Fund. And as such, you are funding not all of the collaborations, but at least a big part of Nordic cultural projects, art projects, and also international collaborations through the Globus project, for example, that has been a part of the Nordic Culture Fund for a number of years. And I know that in the fund strategy as well, there are a lot of considerations about how you fund as an infrastructure the possibility of collaboration in new ways, based on a lot of the conversations that have happened already today, also in the previous panel. Would you share a little bit of the insight, sort of your basing your work on?
Certainly, and thank you for the great keynote already and the previous comments that were made. Yes, Nordic Culture Fund as an organization is in the sense also quite unique, because the fund was established back in 1966 by the Nordic governments, and the fund was given the specific objective to actually advance cross-border cultural collaborations, both within and outside the Nordic region. And it was because there was a strong belief that by investing in cross-border collaborations, arts and culture, we are also able to build more coherent and forward-looking societies. In our existing strategy, we have a mission that is called Culture Drives the Future of the Nordics. And this means that in our time, and considering all the challenges we are facing, culture is not to be seen as something just to be protected or preserved or promoted, but very much as part of the core infrastructure that is needed also to societies to rethink themselves and imagine new alternatives. And I think in order for that to happen, as Musa already mentioned, we also need to kind of rethink our own approaches. How do we actually create the conditions and conditions for meaningful collaborations to actually emerge? Because as Emil already pointed out, many of the existing structures we have on a Nordic level, also on a wider international level, are very much based on kind of short-term project cycles, which don't allow for the kind of more long-term development of relationships, which is eventually the condition for actually building trust in those collaborations. So that's one of the things we are looking at, for example, in our own work. How can we move beyond that kind of project logic and instead try to see how can we also establish new types of partnerships in the field with other funders, organizations, institutions, as a way to kind of build a more long-term infrastructure to that landscape, which is many ways coming more and more fragmented at the moment because of the very same challenges that we are discussing today.
And I think it would be interesting maybe to just elaborate a little bit on how you, when you give others the possibility to dream of a project, you could say, in the funding mechanisms you put up. We have this funding program, this funding program, this funding program. We heard from the previous speakers that the length of time was usually an issue, but Emil also were talking about inequality sort of on a scale between possible collaborators that we just heard. How are you hearing these things or learning all of these things and thinking, okay, as someone who can provide some of the funding, how can we support collaborations in ways that extend the usual partnership model, if you could say that?
Yes, I mean, maybe I can draw on some examples we did within a bigger thematic funding initiative called Globus, which was specifically about kind of expanding the scope of Nordic cultural cooperation into wider global context and kind of moving beyond a national lens when working internationally, instead of trying to see how can we support, enable collaborations that are very strongly locally rooted and anchored as a way to build more mutual reciprocal collaborations. And the key thing for us in that work was firstly to kind of rethink our own relationship with the actors, with the project artists, organizations. We also fund as a more like a dialogue partner, which we have to learn from them in order to understand how we could work better. So that's certainly one thing. And also as a funder, we had to rethink our own processes a bit. For example, when you talk about international cultural collaborations, there's usually a lot of focus on the output of those collaborations. You have to do an exhibition or you have to do a performance. But we drew the focus instead of the process itself, emphasizing that equally as important as the actual output. And that was also a way to kind of starting to shift the focus from projects and outputs to processes and building long-term relationships.
Right. Emil, when you were doing your pitch to Bjarne Koydon, who is not in the room right now.
I hope someone recorded it.
Yes, it is recorded, so it can be sent directly
to
the Director General of the Danish Broadcasting Corporation. But when you did so, and Annie, can I ask you to turn up? Thank you, because otherwise it's feeding. When you did that pitch, what you also did was to give the process of collaboration, actually. One of the things that Annie is just talking about. You came up with that, so this is how we're collaborating, this is how we're workshopping, this is how we're doing it. In establishing in your keynote as well the inequality and inaccessibility to funds from a Greenlandic perspective in the Commonwealth of Denmark, in the film history, can you speak about the importance of that kind of process awareness when wanting to build more equal partnerships? Because it doesn't just happen because we say, oh, you've put your flag here, now we are aware, now we're equal, we're great friends, we're in it together. That doesn't mean we're actually equal.
Yeah, no, I definitely can. Can I just start by saying I'm a little bit relieved that even Kasper Holten can't get his kids off their phones. I mean, that was kind of nice, but yeah, I recognize that. Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks. I think that process is, of course, super important, and it's an integral part of the work that we do, because every film that we make is also so important in building competencies, in getting young people to have their first experience with filmmaking. Even the international partnerships that we make with filmmakers that go to Greenland to shoot, we make sure that a lot of Greenlandic talent are attached to the productions as assistants or whatever they can contribute with, so that we build critical mass and so that we teach also the young filmmakers how to express themselves. But the problem arises when they want to make their own stories. They can always take part in Nordic labs. There are a vast variety of them, and it's always really great to have a funding application for a lab when you send it into Annie to say that we have participation from Greenland or from the Faroe Islands or Sami participations from some of the minorities that are sometimes hard to reach. But what I have to say is that what I see in the young filmmakers is that they're not so interested in that. They are rarely interested in traveling abroad to participate in these workshops, and they often have the sense that they are token participants to fulfill Nordic diversity criteria. So what they're interested in is in telling their own stories. And the problem there is that they don't have access to a lot of funding, so it's extremely difficult for them to raise above a hobby level of filmmaking, whether they're directors or writers or cinematographers or whatever they do. And I have to say that the only reason that I have managed to do that, I wish I could just say that it's because I'm so great, but it's really because I live here. Because I have my home here in Copenhagen, so I have access to a lot of things that my colleagues at home don't. So at the same time as the processes of workshopping projects is super important, and it's super important to have mentorships, I think we need to find a way to make our participants feel that they're doing their own thing, that they're not contributing to other people's projects. And I think that's the tricky detail right now.
And if I can ask you, I want to be mindful of how I'm phrasing the question, not to you specifically, but to everyone in the room.
Sure.
Because you're talking about people wanting to tell their own stories. And in your keynote, you were also, when going through the history of film production, and of film production around Greenland. Maybe let me use that word, not in Greenland, but around it. I think quite often it's a human response to, we laugh a little bit when we hear something uncomfortable, and the first film was shot in Fælleparken, and we're like, hee hee hee. Yeah. But actually it's not funny at all.
No.
It's dead serious to a people, to a community, to a culture, to a history, to identity. And now then, if you're talking about, now we have this big amount of attention, wanting to collaborate, all of these different things. But if the collaboration, does that sometimes then become a way to still take away focus from telling your own stories? Is there also power in that wanting to collaborate sometimes and not just allowing you to do your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see a lot of projects coming in right now to tell their own stories because they feel that Greenland is hot right now. And from my point of view, I mean, I definitely think that I want to, and I also try to use this attention that we have now to our benefit. I mean, we would be stupid not to. So my pitch to Bjarne Corydon was very sincere. It was dead serious. And I think it's important because what I see from especially the Danish side right now is, yes, there's a much bigger interest now, but it's also limited very specifically to these periods where there's a lot of attention. And as soon as Trump had his meeting with NATO at, I can't even remember where, Davos in January, and things de-escalated, the attention also de-escalated very quickly. So I feel that someone on the Danish side should really take seriously the long-term perspective of this relationship that we have. Because when we talk to kids at home, I mean, they're not so accustomed with the Danish Greenlandic common culture as I am. Not at all. So if we want to sustain that, I think it's really important that there's a priority from Denmark to invest.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I wanna move on a little bit because one of the things, Kasper, that you also you were talking about opera, and we were talking about it being international. And one of the things that you wrote to me that I found a great term that I would like to have introduced was the notion of airport opera.
Yeah.
And that there also is a risk sometimes of international collaboration just producing the same thing over and over and over again.
And this connects actually really well to what Emil just talked about, because I can definitely, after more than a century of being misrepresented, understand the need to tell one's own stories. But obviously, what I was promoting was exactly not insisting on telling Danish stories, but on exchanging on a European level between Finland and France and Germany. So, not to say that's in contrast to what you said, but with all the benefits of sharing a European heritage that's bigger than the Danish one, but thus also deeper and richer than if we only looked at what is Denmark, which I think would be too narrow to really understand our role in the world now. It is more kind of a reinvention of who are we as Europeans that we need. The risk is, as you say, you all know it. We travel, and if we are in Beijing or in Buenos Aires or we are in Frankfurt, it's Zara, it's Hennes & Mauritz, it's McDonald's, it's Starbucks, it's the same bloody shops on the street. And it's some of the joy of traveling has been lost, not just because of the shame of carbon dioxide, but also because it's the same bloody shops wherever we go. And the same that is the backside or the possible flip side of international collaboration on the arts. Many opera houses, of course, also as a cost-saving measure. When we do international co-productions, it's great because 5 houses can share production by an international big name and more audiences get to see it. It's more sustainable. It's good. But it also means that in the past there would have been 5 different productions done by 5 national directors, and those opportunities don't exist anymore for the national directors. And it means that the critics don't really want to come to Copenhagen because they've already seen the production in Frankfurt. And the whole thing can have a risk of becoming Zara or Hennes & Mauritz in every city, the same operas produced by the same people. A smaller and smaller number of productions that travel the world. It's fantastic in many ways because great artists get to share with more people, but of course also the risk-taking in such a big international undertaking sometimes smaller. 5 houses need to agree on the artistic profile on the project. And so there is a risk with globalization that if we take the idea of cultural collaboration too far, it can also water out the project, and it can become generic and international in the worst sense.
Absolutely. Julia, you wanted to speak?
I wanted to elaborate it on a little bit different angle, because what you mentioned before is, the role of big institutions, that we should protect them and so on. I absolutely agree that when the democracy is in threat, we should protect institutions, but not only the big ones. And the problem of this, being the same everywhere and so on, is also part of that. I really think somehow we can connect those problems, because what we should protect really is the ecosystem itself, because without experiment, without artists, independent ones, without a possibility to fail, without protecting all the processes and so on, when we only focused on something that is granted, on superstars, on big institutions, and huge, funding systems and so on, sooner or later we can fail with that, because there will not be any kind of free playground, for the artists to be. So I think that the freedom of ecosystem itself and sustainable ecosystem should be the core as well.
Quick response.
Although I would say the institutions can also enable freedom, enable risk-taking in a way that a small project can never do, because we can back up the different projects, and one fails, another can fly. Institutions, the good news is, look at the Kennedy Center. Clearly, artistic institutions are important, more important than we thought, otherwise probably Trump.
Just to be clear, if someone's not aware.
Oh, sorry. The Kennedy Center for Performing Arts in Washington. The good news, as I say, is that it must be important, because otherwise Trump wouldn't have made himself president of an artistic performing arts center. Would he have time for that? The bad news is it's closed, because they didn't act the way that he wanted it to, and now the, Trump Kennedy Center has been closed for renovation. So institutions matter.
Absolutely. Annie, you were taking down some notes as well as and nodding a lot. Is there anything from your perspective that you would like to add before we round off?
No, it was just maybe a reflection and comment on, because I can hear both perspectives, and I wanted to also connect back to what Lars said earlier about the process that is ongoing now on the EU level, the role of cultural diplomacy, international cultural relations, and just to say that what is proposed is specifically the international cultural relations approach, which is kind of more based on bottom-up approaches, also the role of civil society, and exactly connecting culture also more closely to democracy building, working with grassroots. So in a way, another approach than kind of a traditional way of thinking cultural diplomacy and how we promote culture abroad.
Thank you so much, all of you. I think it is an important place to round off the conversation. And I think, Julia, as you were just mentioning the entire ecosystem, I think when we are under pressure, we as a European maybe right now, there often sometimes can also be a tendency to support the safest things. And I think what you just said is also a reminder to spread out the awareness of an entire ecosystem that is much more both diverse and also full of a lot of different practices and artistic practices in order to actually maintain a future artistic community and cultural community. Thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause. So, while you find your seats, we are ready to round off almost. It has been a very, very good day, at least I can only speak from my own perspective. But just to round us off, before I say the final words, I would like to invite to the stage Camilla Mortos, the CEO of Danish Cultural Institute, to give some closing remarks.
Thank you. I think it has been really amazing presentation and discussion. So it's difficult for me actually to wrap up or give some closing remarks, because how can I compete with all your good points? However, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the conversation we shared today. We We began actually with a rather difficult question. How can we build trust and international relationships in time which is marked by war, polarization, and geopolitical uncertainty? But today we have seen through perspectives across culture, media, research, and politics. I mean, it has been different viewpoints, and sometimes also maybe, I don't know, different conclusions. But I also see shared recognition that trust cannot be granted. And I think, just to quote a little bit, I think it was Ingrid from the second panel, who I just rephrase it a bit, say there's a million reasons not to have trust, but we really need to build it. Because without facts and without trust, we cannot make democracy work. It's so simple, I mean, but the solution is not simple. I mean, we need to build trust between nations, we need to be trust in institutions, we need to have trust in information, but ultimately, from my point of view, the cultural point of view, we need to create trust between people. And here I again said that I think we need to count in culture as an essential player in this work. Because it's not because culture can, solve geopolitical conflicts. On the other hand, actually culture can sometimes be a very exclusive tool, or it can be the one thing you are doing when you're denying people's right to their own identity. So as I used to say, there's nothing soft about soft power, there's nothing soft about culture. That said, it's also a tremendous tool that we have through art, storytelling, journalism, research, language, and dialogue, that we can connect people and dealing with political realities which pull us apart. So, well, it's not, because we will have, we have provided simple answers. I think actually we think that many of the solutions will lie in the complexities to have a bigger grab on that. So, yeah, I think that we just need to understand that it is because culture can make that kind of reflection, exchange, and new relations through art and culture that we can together as partners, as a coalition between the Danish cultural life, the Danish Association, the Constructive Institute and the Political Society. Together, I think we need to join together because culture is not a luxury around politics and diplomacy. It is actually very essential to make trust, cooperation, and also peaceful relations, if possible. So, thanks first of all for the coalition, and I think before I know Musa, our very skillful, have guided us through the day with empathy and professionalism, will make the final roundup. But I will also say thank you for my perspectives. The coalition will go on. I think we have something in common. We have big tasks, and we will include as much as we can in cultural life, and with journalism, with media, together, because we have a lot to deal with these times, but we do also have great opportunities to make new works together. And as I was just whispering, but I think Musa will go, I would not forget our big supporters for this event, the Visti Foundation. Visti, the Folmer Visti, was actually the founder of the Danish Cultural Institute, and now here we have a beautiful foundation which still also work for creating trust, understanding, and international cooperation, especially in Europe, and we're very thankful for that they have supported this conference. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Camilla, for rounding us off. As you said, I will finalize. There is always a lot of power in having final word. which I mean very seriously, and I also take very seriously. It's been an absolute pleasure to facilitate today and to host it for you all. I've heard a lot of good conversations, not just on the stage, but also out there in the room. When we round off here now, there are snacks and beverages outside, and there is about an hour for networking as well that I hope you also take the possibility to do if you have time to do that. It is often not just listening to the panels, but in the breaks that all of the magic actually happens and the seeds for the new collaborations happen. So take that time, talk to someone you don't know, approach someone you don't know, and when you do so, stay curious. We need curiosity in this society, and social media is also taking that away from us. We've had a lot of conversations today, and of course one of the takeaways was that culture is democratic infrastructure. And while I agree on that, I want to bring something that I think Helle Faber said in her keynote or during the panel, that it is the small things that we take for granted that slowly, one step at a time, disappear, that all of a sudden change the world that we're living in. It starts as, I think you said it starts as something, a new normal, and then it becomes a culture. Which means that we cannot take it for granted, but also that if we do not actually actively safeguard it, it might disappear. We are in a place, in a setting, where we have so much power, so much privilege, so much fortune, so much love, and so much generosity, and we do not, in this room, take that for granted. I will say that to you, because I believe you do not do so. There is, in being in this room and being part of this conversation, also a commitment to actually doing something about the issues we're facing. Otherwise, it's worth nothing. And we have to fight back. Stay safe out there, take care of each other, both of the ones that you love and maybe also of the ones that you don't love. Have a lovely day. Thank you so much for today.